Okay, class, we are going to continue now in our discussion of Chapter 6. We're going to look now at employment and unemployment. Recall we're working through how to measure whether or not we're attaining the three goals that we have for the macroeconomy. The first goal was high sustainable economic growth, which we addressed in Chapter 7, had several tools to measure that. We worked through our second goal, which was price stability, in our video on prices and inflation. And if you recall, we didn't really state our third goal. We said, put in low unemployment for kind of a placeholder, but that'll be incorrect on a test. We didn't quite have the language we needed yet for the third goal with regards to employment and unemployment. And we will have that third goal restated by the end of this video. So let's start with our discussion of employment and unemployment and ask the question to start with, will we ever run out of jobs? Now, I think this is a concern on people's mind with the discussion of artificial intelligence. It seems to be a discussion that's received some attention here in recent years. When I was young, there was a lot of automation happening in manufacturing facilities like automobile plants, and a lot of people were concerned then about robots taking our jobs, and now people are concerned about artificial intelligence taking our jobs. So let's address this question: will we ever run out of jobs? Well, the first thing to answer is what is a job? That might sound basic, but the answer is very important. Okay. Jobs are the result of something. Okay? They're the result of people producing goods and services to meet unmet wants and needs. You might remember from Eco 230, a basic definition of economics is it's the study of the choices people make given the scarcity of resources. And we talk about how we have this basic problem in economics of we have unlimited wants but limited resources. So again, we're talking about meeting unmet wants. Wants are unlimited. People will always have additional wants. Okay? So, by deduction, okay, we're never going to run out of jobs because we will never satisfy all of our wants. Okay? We will never satisfy all of our wants. So jobs are the result of people producing goods and services to meet unmet wants. We're never going to satisfy all these unmet wants, so we're never going to run out of jobs. Okay? Now, sometimes people ask the question, should we pass laws to protect jobs? Okay? Should we pass laws to protect jobs? Well, I mean, it depends on what type of law you're talking about and what will it achieve. But I'll just say, so I'm not going to answer this yes or no, but I will say you need to be careful. Okay? You need to be careful. Okay? Let's think about this a little bit. So we have unlimited wants. Okay? And unlimited wants are going to lead to increased production. Right? Why increase production? Well, assuming our current level of production is meeting our current wants or our current level of wants that are being met, but these wants are unlimited, so we can always look to produce more to meet more of those unlimited wants. And if we're going to increase production, we're going to increase the jobs people are going to have to do, so there's going to be an increase in new jobs, and as more people work, okay, we're going to increase our standard of living. Okay? Well, why do I say be careful? Because it's the increased production that's generating the new jobs, which is generating the standard of living, increased standard of living. Okay? Sometimes if you just focus here without focusing here, you can cause standards of living to go down. Okay? So I want to talk about this with a couple examples. Okay? So one example is one told by Milton Friedman. Okay, Milton Friedman is a Nobel Prize winning economist. We've mentioned him briefly already in this class. Well, there was a story, and I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but there's a story of Milton Friedman during one of his trips to China. And it's relayed here, Milton Friedman's shovel versus spoon story. So, while traveling by car during one of his many overseas travels, Professor Milton Friedman spotted scores of road builders moving earth with shovels instead of modern machinery like bulldozers. Remember, China's a communist country. When he asked why powerful equipment wasn't being used instead of so many laborers, his host, a Communist Party official, told him it was to keep employment high in the construction industry. If they used tractors or modern road building equipment, fewer people would have jobs, was his host's logic. Okay? To which Milton Friedman responded, well, instead of shovels, why don't you give them spoons and create more jobs? Right? Or you could, by extension, say, well, why don't we take away their spoons and just have them build it by hand? Right? Why don't you build your dirt dam by hand? You'd need more people. Well, again, what's the purpose of a dam? It's to meet an unmet want, right? The unmet want is you want to store up water so there's water available during times of drought. That water can be used for cleaning or, watering livestock or doing laundry or whatever, just to have to drink. That's the purpose of a dam. And by building a dam and storing up water, you're going to improve people's lives. Now, in the process, you'll create some jobs, but that's not the purpose. The purpose isn't the jobs, it's to store up the water. And sometimes we can get this understanding wrong and put jobs at the highest importance instead of the overall well-being. Here's another example, okay? Maybe I should include this in the notes here, okay? The railroads example. Now, again, this may be apocryphal, okay? People have debated it, okay? It's purported to be a letter to President Andrew Jackson dated January 31st, 1829. So to President Jackson, the canal system of this country is being threatened by the spread of new form of transportation known as railroads. The federal government must preserve the canals for the following reasons. One, if canal boats are supplanted by railroads, serious unemployment will result. Captains, cooks, drivers, hostlers, repairmen, and lock tenders will be left without a means of livelihood. Not to mention the numerous farmers now employed in growing hay for the horses. These canal boats were pulled by horses, like through the Erie Canal. Two, boat builders would suffer, and tow line, whip, and harness makers would be left destitute. Three, canal boats are absolutely essential to the defense of the United States. In the event of the expected trouble with England, the Erie Canal would be the only means by which we could ever move the supplies so vital to waging modern warfare. As you may well know, Mr. President, railroad carriages are pulled at the enormous speed of 15 miles per hour by engines in which, in addition to endangering life and limb of passengers, roar and snort their way through the countryside, setting fire to crops, scaring the livestock, and frightening women and children. The Almighty certainly never intended that people should travel at such a breakneck speed. Interestingly, it's signed by Martin Van Buren, the then governor of New York. Okay? Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson, was the 7th president of the United States. Martin Van Buren went on to become the 8th president of the United States. And you know, even if this letter isn't a historical, again, and there's some debating claims here, okay, but it serves the point, right? Martin Van Buren became the 8th president of the United States, and he certainly didn't ban railroads as the president of the United States. Why? Because he was no longer, you know, just worrying about employment in New York with the Erie Canal. He realized that the railroads were much better equipped at moving things across the country than just canal boats. Canal boats certainly work well in places where you have to move things along a canal, but you know, not across the Great Western Expansion. The railroad is much more capable of doing that. So again, the point here is you need to be careful. Okay, you need to be careful. Laws designed to protect jobs often, not always, but often lead to decreased productivity. Okay? So, again, we have unlimited wants, but if you pass a law that decreases productivity, what's that going to lead to? The most important thing is it's going to lead to a decreased standard of living. And ultimately, it'll decrease the number of jobs. Okay, because if the economy does much worse, eventually you're going to have fewer jobs. Okay? So, when economists look at legislation with regards to employment and unemployment, what they want to see is laws should promote sustainable economic growth. Okay, if they promote sustainable economic growth, we're going to get increases in productivity, increases in our standards of living. And really it should increase the quality and the quantity of jobs. Okay? So just as an introduction here to our understanding of employment and unemployment, it's very important to keep your focus on the most important goal, which is high sustainable economic growth. The reason why that's the most important goal to economists is because the other ones tend to flow out of that. If we have high sustainable economic growth, we tend to have price stability and what's serving as our third goal right now, low unemployment. Okay, but if you focus on those lower goals, you can end up not achieving any, especially if you miss sustainable economic growth. Okay, all right. Let's now talk about some tools here that we're going to use. Okay, and I might need to adjust the camera here a little bit because I've reoriented the page here a little bit. But we're going to talk about some tools for measuring employment and unemployment. Okay, so we now need some tools to measure this. In the book that I'm using, there's a similar table here that you can pull up and have at your disposal. But I want to show you how we divide the U.S. population, okay, for the purposes of measuring employment and unemployment. Okay, so you have the U.S. population. We're over 300 million strong now. Okay, and we're going to divide that population into two categories to start with. Okay. So the two categories are going to be those under 16, okay, those in the armed forces, and those that are institutionalized. Okay? The institutionalized, that's just a polite way of saying people in prison. Okay? So that's one part of the US population. The other part is what we call the working age population. Okay? Or sometimes called the civilian, non-institutionalized population. Okay? I prefer the working age population. But you can break up the US population, okay? So again, these two blocks together equal the US population. But the two blocks are basically those not in the working age population. That's going to include people that are under 16 in the armed forces. We don't count them as in our working age population, or those in prison. Okay? That's one block. That makes up part of the US population. The other block is the working age population. Put these two blocks together and it'll equal the US population. Okay? But, okay, the working age population can be divided into two blocks. Okay? So we're dividing this part of the US population, this block, into two other blocks. Okay? Those that are not in the labor force and what we call the labor force. So if you add not in the labor force and the labor force together, you don't get the US population, you get the working age population. So those not in the labor force plus the labor force equals the working age population. Okay? Now the labor force itself can be divided into two blocks. And the two blocks that make up the labor force are the employed and the unemployed. Okay? So if you add the employed and the unemployed together, you'd get the labor force, not the working age population, not the US population. You add employed and unemployed and you get the labor force. Okay? Now, with this information and understanding how the population can be broken down, we now have some tools we can use to calculate some information that'll give us a feel for what's going on with the U.S. economy in terms of employment and unemployment. Okay? So let's first look at the unemployment rate. Okay? The unemployment rate. Okay? The unemployment rate is equal to the number of people unemployed divided by not the US population, not the working age population, the labor force. And you multiply that by 100%. I think a lot of people assume that the unemployment rate is the percentage of people that are unemployed in the population. It is not the percentage of people unemployed in the population. It's the percentage of people unemployed as a percentage of the labor force. Okay? As a percentage of the labor force. So the unemployed divided by the labor force times 100%. What does it measure? Okay? So it measures people willing and able to work who do not have jobs but have looked for a job in the last 4 weeks. So the Bureau of Labor and Statistics conducts a survey, and maybe they contact your house and they're trying to calculate the unemployment rate, and they get you on the phone and they say, "Are you over the age of 16? Not in the military, not in prison?" You answer, "Yeah, I'm over 16. Okay, I am not in the armed forces. I'm not in prison." Okay, well then you're part of the working age population. They will then ask you, do you have a job? And if you say no, they don't put you in the unemployed because they don't know if you're unemployed or you're just not in the labor force. So they have to ask an additional question. Do you want, are you willing and able to work? You might answer yes. Okay, but they still don't know where to put you. And they'll say, well, when's the last time you looked for a job? And you might say, yesterday. Well, okay, then you're unemployed. If you say 5 weeks ago, they say, well, thank you, and they put you not in the labor force. Okay, and you won't be included in the unemployment numbers. Okay, so let's work through an example. All right, so we're back in the People's Republic of Bob. So this is not the United States. We're in the People's Republic of Bob. Let's assume the People's Republic of Bob has a population of 50 people. Okay, we'll say that there are 10 that are retired. Okay, with no job. And we have 10 that have full-time jobs. 10 with full-time jobs. We have 10 with part-time jobs that want full-time. Full-time jobs. We have 10 with no job, and they're actively looking. Means they're currently looking, okay? Actively looking for a job. And we have 10 with no job. No job. They want a job. They want a job, but have not looked for a job in over a month. Okay? So what I want you to do with that information is calculate the unemployment rate. Calculate the unemployment rate for the People's Republic of Bob. So what is the unemployment rate for the People's Republic of Bob? What does it equal? The unemployment rate for the People's Republic of Bob. So why don't you pause the video and calculate that. Okay, you should have gotten 33.3 repeating percent. Okay, how did you get that? Okay, well again, how do you calculate it? It is the unemployed divided by the labor force. Where are the unemployed? These are the only ones that are unemployed. They have no job and they're actively looking. Okay? So that's the unemployed. There's the 10. Well, what's the labor force equal? Well, the labor force equals, if you recall, the unemployed plus the employed. Okay? Well, who is the unemployed? We've already found them, these 10. Who are the employed? The employed are the 10 with a full-time job and the 10 with a part-time job. So the 10 is going to be divided by the employed, which is 10 plus 10, that's 20, plus the unemployed, which we already determined was 10. So it's 10 divided by 30 times 100%, and that's where we get the 33.3%. Okay? So the labor force equals 30, the 10 unemployed plus the 20 employed. What about the retired with no jobs? They're not in the labor force. Okay? What about the 10s that don't have a job, they want a job, but they haven't looked in over a month? They're not in the labor force. Okay? Okay, let's talk a little bit about what the unemployment rate does not measure. Okay? One you may have already figured out, you just don't know the name, and that is it does not measure discouraged workers. And during a recession, a really bad recession, this could be millions of people. Discouraged workers could be someone like this. Now, these 10 retired are probably happy. They're retired. They don't want to work. We're not too worried about them. But these people clearly want jobs. and they've been looking for a long time, but maybe they grew so frustrated and they didn't see any new job postings that in the last month or so they haven't looked. They've already applied for all the jobs that they see available. And that was over a month ago. So these people may have grown discouraged and stopped working. And this can be millions of people during a bad recession. So the unemployment rate does not include discouraged workers. It also does not include the what we call the underemployed, right? These 10 part-time workers say they want full-time work. But if the Bureau of Labor and Statistics calls them up and they answer the phone and they say, "Hi, are you over the age of 16, not in the military, not in prison?" And they say yes, and they say, "Do you have a job?" And they say yes, they go, "Okay, thank you," and they hang up the phone. They just put them in the employed. It doesn't include the fact that they're underemployed. They'd like full-time work and they only have part-time work. Another form of people that might be underemployed is, not just not having enough hours, but not in the job position you'd like. If you're an accountant, okay, and you've been laid off as an accountant, and all you could do is get work, unloading trucks for UPS, you would be considered underemployed. You have the skills to be an accountant. You're unloading trucks full time for UPS or whatever, because that's the work you could get to pay your bills, but you're still underemployed. Okay? All right, let's look at the unemployment rate in the United States. And again, you should have a feel for these numbers. Here's the unemployment rate over the last 70 years across the United States. And we've averaged about 6%, okay? The average is in here about 6-7% has been our average, okay? In our most recent history, we're at some record lows, okay? So at the beginning of this year, January 2020, okay, we were at 3.6% unemployment, okay? Very low unemployment. It obviously jumped with the pandemic and the mandatory closing of businesses, okay? But we were at record lows, okay? Our previous double-digit unemployment rate was as a result of the 2008 crash. Now notice that 2008 crash really happened in about October of 2008. We call it the 2008 crash. That was when things went really bad. But we were only at about our average unemployment rate. It was obviously ticking up. But the unemployment rate usually peaks after the financial problems, okay? So it peaked there around October of 2009, okay? And you see these high marks at recessions. Here's the early 2000s recession, the early 90s recession, the early 80s recession, and so on, okay? But certainly we never saw anything like we did with the mandatory closing of businesses. But you can already see, so you can, it's even hard to, so there's April, 14.7%, okay? The most recent numbers have dropped significantly. So hopefully we're going to see this V-shaped recession. Get in it quick, get out of it quick. Okay? All right, let's now talk about a couple other measures. Unemployment, the unemployment rate is not the only measure we're going to look at. Got a couple more, okay? One is the labor force participation rate, okay? And the labor force participation rate is equal to the labor force, okay? So labor force was in the denominator with the unemployment rate. It's now in the numerator. And we're going to divide it by the working age population, okay? Or the non-institutionalized civilian labor force. I prefer calling it the working age population. And you multiply that by 100%. Okay? What are we trying to measure with it? We're trying to measure the interests of a population in working. Okay? In working. So how interested is the population in working? Okay? So you just take your labor force and divide it by the working age population. You have some homework that has you do that. Okay? Not too difficult to do. But let's look at the labor force participation rate over time. okay? Now you can see from the late 1960s to about the year 2000, we saw steady increases in the labor force participation rate, okay? Starting in here around 58% or so, climbing to about 67%, 66%, somewhere in there, okay? What was that increase from? Okay, I want you to pause the video for a second and postulate, pause it rather, why we saw steady increases in the labor force participation rate from the late 60s. Okay, so what's the correct answer? The correct answer is women entering the labor force. Okay, so women traditionally were not in the labor force. Okay, my wife is currently not in the labor force. Is she over 16? Yes. Is she in the armed forces? No. Is she in prison? Thankfully, no. But she's not looking to work. Why? She's a full-time stay-at-home mother that homeschools. Okay, she has a degree in pharmacy, but she's not working and she's not looking to work. So she's not considered in the labor force. Okay, but from the late 60s to about 2000, women continually entering the labor force saw those labor force participation rates go up. Since 2000, though, we've seen steady declines in the labor force participation rate. Okay, about September 2015, we get to about a low, 62.4. It had started to climb, okay, until the pandemic, okay. But this period here of declines in the labor force participation rate are a little bit disheartening to economists, specifically because of who it involves. This is not women returning home to more traditional roles. What this primarily is men 18 to 40, prime working years, dropping out of the labor force. And certainly more research needs to be done on why this is. Do we have policies in place that are encouraging this? Are there societal influences encouraging this? Why are men dropping out of the labor force? It's not a very healthy sign. Okay. All right, and the last tool we're going to look at right now is the employment rate. Okay. Now, I call it the employment rate. Many economists call it the employment rate. A better name for it, and some people do use this, is probably the employment to population ratio. The reason this is such a bad name is because people just think it's the converse of the unemployment rate. In other words, people think, this is incorrect, but people think if the unemployment rate is 5%, that means the employment rate is 95%. Well, if that were the case, this would be the most useless measure in all of economics, okay? Because it doesn't tell us any new information. That's not how you calculate the employment rate, okay? If that's how you calculate the employment rate, it would be the number of employed divided by the labor force, just like the unemployment rate is the unemployed divided by the labor force. That is not how you calculate the employment rate. The employment rate is the number of employed, that's true, in the numerator, but it's divided by the working age population. And thus why some people prefer to call it the employment to population ratio. Okay? What does it measure? It measures the ability of an economy, it measures the ability of an economy to create jobs for a growing population. Okay, so as a population grows, you're going to need to create more jobs for that growing population. If the number of jobs and the number of people grow at the same time, the employment rate would stay flat. You're creating jobs at the same rate that you're creating people. If you're creating people and you're creating jobs, but you're not creating jobs as fast as you're creating people, the employment rate would go down over time. Okay? And if you're creating people, but you're creating jobs at a faster rate than you're creating people, then the employment rate would go up. Okay? Again, you multiply this by 100%. Okay, it's a rate. So let's look at the employment rate over time. Now, this is clearly going to have some oscillation caused by the business cycle, right? Downturns are from a bad economy. So here's our current pandemic, right? Here's the 2008 crash. Here's the early 2000s, etc. But you can see, in general, we've done very well over time at creating jobs for our growing economy, okay? Now, we really took a hit in the 2008 crash, but we were doing a good job at recovering from that until this recent pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see what the next 10 years are like if we get back on this trend line, okay, or if we've established a kind of a new low, okay. And again, in your textbook in the homework section, you're asked to do some of these calculations. Okay, so make sure you're doing those in your homework. All right, as I promised, we need to talk about or redefine our third goal for the macroeconomy. And to do that, we need to assemble some additional language here. Okay? So we're going to talk about different types of unemployment. Okay? And there are three types of unemployment that we're going to look at. But only one of these do economists want to address with macroeconomic policy. Now, to be clear, not all economists would want to even address the one type with macroeconomic policy, but all economists agree there's only one type of unemployment that we would even consider using macroeconomic policy to address. So let's go through these three types, okay? The first is what we call frictional unemployment. Okay? Frictional unemployment. And frictional unemployment is caused by labor market turnover and job search. Okay? Labor market turnover and job search. Okay? And this is quite normal unemployment. This is why our goal is never to have zero unemployment, because this type of unemployment is quite healthy. All right? In fact, laws to get rid of this could be quite detrimental. For instance, let's say you're not working and in May you get a degree in computer science, okay? A very in high demand labor market. And you walk across the aisle, okay, or walk across the stage, okay, and you accept your diploma from the president, and you're now graduated, and you're now officially on the job market, and you're looking, okay? You might even have several interviews lined up, and you're going to be interviewing over the next month and a half, and they're all very good job prospects. If you got called in the middle of this by the BLS, you would be classified as unemployed. Are we worried about you? No, I'm not worried in the slightest. In fact, you would be considered frictionally unemployed. And in fact, if we passed a law to get rid of this, it would look something like this. Okay, we're going to pass a law that says you're required to take the first job that's offered to you. Would that lower frictional unemployment? Sure. It would. But what? That wouldn't be best for you, right? Your first job offer might not be your best job offer. You want the right to stay unemployed and accept the best job offered to you, okay? So frictional unemployment isn't any problem that anybody's worried about, okay? So some of the unemployment in the unemployment rate are people who are frictionally unemployed that we have no concerns about whatsoever. Okay? It's caused by very normal labor market turnover or job search. Okay? So we certainly don't want to use macroeconomic policy to address frictional unemployment. The second type of unemployment is more troubling. But that said, we still do not want to use macroeconomic policy to address. And that is what we call structural unemployment. Okay? Now, this is caused by not having skills to match the labor market. Okay? Now, this could mean a couple things. It could mean you have bad skills. Okay? If you want to be let's say, you wanted to be an accountant, okay? But you don't know how to use the latest accounting software that every firm is going to require you to use, then you're going to find you might know every bit about ledger entries, but if you can't use the software standards that your employer requires, you're going to have a hard time getting a job. Okay? If you're looking to be, an administrative assistant and you can't use current software for word processing and spreadsheet maintenance, you're going to find yourself unemployed. You don't have the skills required in the labor market. But this could also mean your skills are good, but that's not the type of work that we're doing for a wage that you're willing to accept anymore, maybe in this country. Okay? So maybe you're a fantastic garment worker, okay? Making textiles, clothing. Well, most of those jobs have shipped overseas. You may have fantastic skills, but we just don't produce that stuff in the United States anymore, okay? You would be considered structurally unemployed, okay? The last type of unemployment, and this is the one where we might want to use macroeconomic policy. Economists debate this, and we're going to talk about that over the course of the semester, but this is the one they debate over. No economist wants to use macro policy to deal with these, okay? So the third is cyclical unemployment, okay? And this is caused by a downturn in the business cycle. Okay, so we're talking about a recession, producing less than potential. Okay, so I usually have like a mental hitching post to help me remember these. Frictional unemployment is job search. Now that's not enough for a correct answer, but it gets your mind going. Okay, this one is bad skills. Now you got to be careful. Your skills could be very good. They're just required in a different job market. Okay. If you live in Richmond, Kentucky, and you're a nuclear physicist, you're going to be unemployed because we don't have any nuclear power plants nearby. It doesn't mean you have bad skills per se. They're just required in a different labor market. Okay? And cyclical unemployment is just a bad economy. How do you know if you're cyclically unemployed? Okay? Well, if you graduate and you have a fantastic degree with wonderful skills that are required in the job market, and you've done all the searching you need to do, but you find out, at all these places you interviewed that said, man, you're perfect, would love to hire you, but there's a hiring freeze because our company's doing bad. And this is happening across several different market types. You might be the victim of cyclical unemployment. You're unemployed because of you've done plenty of search, you have really good skills, but nobody's hiring right now. Well, it might be because you're cyclically unemployed, okay? Now be careful. You definitely don't want to graduate and be structurally unemployed, right? Make sure you're getting the skills that you need, okay? And a degree is no guarantee of that anymore, okay? Unfortunately, at EKU and at many institutions will give you a degree, but it may not be one that's giving you skills that are employable. All right. Oftentimes students focus too much on getting a degree, and they look to take the easiest professors and the easiest methods and the easiest classes, and they haven't acquired any skills, and they find themselves structurally unemployed after going into debt to get a degree. Okay, so make sure this isn't you. Okay, now why don't we want to use macro policy to solve these? Again, this one's normal. It's healthy. This one, we might want to use microeconomic skills. We might want to use job training programs or something like that, or some type of training or re-education or something like that. This is the only one where you want to turn the whole ship around, the whole ship being the U.S. economy. Okay? Here you want to send out a rescue craft. Here you might want to change the position of the U.S. economy because the economy is bad. Okay? All right. We're almost there. We're almost ready to discuss our third goal for the economy. Okay? Our third goal for the U.S. economy. But we just need a couple more definitions to get us there, to get us home. Okay? And one is the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate of unemployment. Okay? This occurs when we are only experiencing a naturally occurring amount of both frictional and structural unemployment. Okay, and by naturally occurring amount, we're talking about here in the U.S. about 1.5 to 2.5%. Okay, 1.5 to 2.5%. Okay, that's a naturally occurring amount of frictional, 1.5 to 2.5%. That's a naturally occurring amount of structural, 1.5 to 2.5% of unemployment. Okay, in other words, maybe I should say and cyclical unemployment is 0%. Okay, so we have naturally occurring amounts of frictional, 1.5 to 2.5, naturally occurring amounts of structural, 1.5 to 2.5. Okay, and cyclical unemployment is 0%. Okay, so the natural unemployment rate is probably 3 to 5%. So in 2020, before the pandemic, we were about at the natural rate of unemployment. Well, a couple questions here. What if the actual unemployment rate what do I mean by the actual unemployment rate? The unemployment rate that we calculate. This is the actual unemployment rate over time. Okay? Right now, or at least the last calculation in July, the actual unemployment rate was 10.2%. That is way above the natural rate of unemployment, which is about 3 to 5. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. What if the actual unemployment rate is above the natural rate? So the unemployment rate is greater than the natural rate of unemployment. What does that mean? Well, it means the economy is below potential. GDP. So we're in a recession. Okay? And we have cyclical unemployment. Okay? So cyclical unemployment is greater than 0%. That's what we're talking about. Okay? So if the actual rate is above the natural rate, we're talking about a recession type of scenario, or below potential. And cyclical is greater than 0%. Well, what if the actual unemployment rate is below the natural rate? In other words, the unemployment rate is less than the natural rate of unemployment. What's going on there? Well, cyclical unemployment is 0%. Okay, it's not negative, it's 0%. Sorry. So what if the actual rate of unemployment is below the natural rate? The unemployment rate is less than the natural rate of unemployment. What's going on? Well, the cyclical unemployment rate is 0%. And we have less than the naturally occurring amount of frictional and structural unemployment. Okay, what does that look like? We have less than the naturally occurring amount of frictional unemployment, structural unemployment. Well, when the economy is going really fast, and labor markets are tight, you'll notice that firms won't spend nearly as much time searching for the right employee. Okay? And they also won't necessarily require that they have all the skills that they want. If you look, most job postings for an entry-level position require 1 to 3 years of experience. Okay? In a related field. That's kind of tough to break into, right? How do you get started if you need experience for an entry-level position? Well, good news for a college graduate is when the economy is above potential, because what's going on when we're above potential is the economy is going too fast. And I think I should probably say that here. The economy is above potential. Again, it's bad news for the economy, but it would be good news for a graduating senior, because they're going to cut into the naturally occurring amount of frictional and structural, right? Part of the skills required to get a job in your area is 1 to 3 years of experience. Well, they might waive that in this scenario. So we're cutting into the naturally occurring amount of structural unemployment. They might typically, interview, 30 people. But it's so hard to find people because the economy's going so fast. They might just offer you the job on the spot. You might be their first interview. You met their criteria. They're like, listen, we'll give you the job today if you'll accept it. Okay? They're cutting into the naturally occurring amount of frictional and structural unemployment. Okay? I mean, you could see this in the fast food industry. In the fast food industry, what are the skills that are needed? Well, there's not a lot of skills necessarily required, except for a very important one being customer service. If you work at McDonald's at the cash register, I mean, you don't even need to be able to add and subtract. The machine does all that for you. But you do need to be a happy, smiling face. Okay? So that's a skill that they want. But when the economy is going really fast, everyone kind of moves up. So people are finding it easier to find better and better jobs. So it gets harder to fill these positions in fast food. So what would be cutting into structural unemployment? It would be, listen, I wouldn't usually hire this kid to work at McDonald's because he doesn't have the necessary skills, meaning the social skills, the interpersonal skills, the customer service skills, But what can I do? I need a warm body. So I hire somebody. and I shorten up my searches, okay? So that's what it looks like if the actual unemployment rate is below the natural rate, okay? So that gets us to one more term, and that term is full employment. Full employment occurs when, okay, when the actual unemployment rate is exactly equal to the natural rate of unemployment. Right now, you know, it's sometimes difficult to know exactly when this occurs, but we can certainly say here in 2019, we look like we were at the natural rate, maybe even below it. Okay, but we're in this 3 to 5% range here, right? In January of December of 2019 is 3.5. You know, it wasn't up around 5 until March of 2016. Okay, so 2016, 2017, 2018, there's a good portion of the time there we're right around potential GDP. Okay, we're right around the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, so we're finally there. What is the third goal for the economy? You can go back to your earlier notes where we said the third goal was, we said low unemployment, but we said that's not really the third goal. That's just a placekeeper because we don't have the language yet. Well, we now have the language. The third goal for the economy, okay, is full employment. Okay, that is the third goal for the economy. We want to achieve full employment. That does not mean that everybody who wants a job has a job, okay? Because people that are structurally employed may want a job, they might be willing to work, and they might not have a job, okay? Full employment means the actual unemployment rate equals the natural rate, and that natural rate is somewhere between 3 and 5%. Economists may argue over that a little bit, but that gives us a range. No economist would say it's 10%. And no economist would say it's 0%. Okay, so there are people that are willing and able to work that do not have jobs. Okay, when we're at full employment, when we're at potential GDP. Okay, and so that concludes our discussion of employment and unemployment. God bless, and we'll talk to you guys soon.